The Confederation of Aligned Systems had spent the better part of 3 millennia perfecting the art of not getting eaten. This was, admittedly, easier said than done when half the species in known space had evolved from things with too many teeth, and the other half had evolved from things that really wished they had more teeth. The result, according to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Was a carefully orchestrated ballet of terror, where everyone pretended to be civilized while simultaneously calculating their odds of survival in any given room. Station Meridian hung in the void between 7 different territorial zones, which made it the perfect location for a diplomatic summit. Perfect, in this case, meant that nobody could blow it up without starting a war with everyone else, which passed for peacekeeping in galactic politics. The station gleamed with the aesthetic choices of 47 different species, resulting in architecture that looked like a committee had gotten into a fight with a kaleidoscope and lost. The summit itself concerned trade routes through the Kelfara Nebula, which would have been straightforward except that 4 different species claimed ancestral rights to the space dust in question. Never mind that space dust was, by definition, everywhere and belonged to nobody. Try telling that to the Thirnathi, who insisted their great-great-great to the power of 800 grandparents had sneezed in that general direction once. Security for such events required a delicate touch. The Confederation couldn't just hire the biggest, scariest species available, because that would terrify everyone else into hiding in their quarters. They couldn't hire the smallest, friendliest species, because nobody would take them seriously. They had settled on a compromise, hiring security forces from species that fell into what they called the Goldilocks zone of intimidation, threatening enough to command respect, docile enough not to trigger everyone's prey instincts. Humans, as it turned out, fit this category perfectly, which was hilarious if you knew anything about human history, but the Confederation xenobiologists had been reassured by humanity's forward-facing eyes and omnivorous dentition. Predatory characteristics? Yes, but not apex predatory characteristics. The fact that humans smiled a lot sealed the deal. Surely nothing that showed its teeth that frequently could be truly dangerous. She stood at her assigned post outside Conference Hall 7, armor plates reflecting the station's artificial lighting in a way that probably looked professional. The armor was mostly for show. Human military doctrine had long since moved past the need for bulky protective gear in most scenarios, but other species found it comforting. Made humans look bigger, more solid, less squishy. She had stopped questioning the logic years ago. The past 6 hours had been monumentally uneventful, which was exactly how guard duty was supposed to go. Various delegates had shuffled past, some on legs, some on appendages that defied easy classification, all of them carefully avoiding eye contact. Standard behavior. She had learned early in her career that most species found direct eye contact with humans unsettling. Something about binocular vision and pursuit predator targeting systems. She tried not to take it personally. The Velcari delegation arrived precisely on schedule, which would have been impressive if they weren't notorious for their obsessive punctuality. They moved through the corridor in a formation that suggested military training, which made sense given that the Velcari were, without exaggeration, apex predators that had somehow developed space travel before their planet's other species had finished evolving thumbs. They stood roughly 2.5 meters tall, built like someone had taken a large carnivore, given it opposable digits, and taught it advanced mathematics. Their fur ranged from deep amber to charcoal gray, marked with patterns that identified clan lineage going back thousands of generations. They moved with the fluid grace of creatures that had spent millions of years practicing the art of being at the top of the food chain. Most species gave the Velcari an extremely wide berth. The Confederation had invited them to the summit because leaving them out would have been catastrophically stupid, but nobody was happy about it. There was brave, there was foolish, and then there was standing between a Velcari and something they wanted. Conventional wisdom suggested avoiding the third option. She nodded respectfully as the delegation approached. The lead ambassador, fur marked with the silver streaks of advanced age, returned the gesture with what might have been approval. Humans and Velcari had maintained cordial relations for the past century, mostly because humans had been smart enough not to run screaming the first time they met. Velcari respected that. Anything that didn't immediately recognize them as a threat was either very brave or very stupid, and the Velcari had eventually concluded humans were the former. The delegation swept into the conference hall with the kind of presence that made other species instinctively check their escape routes. She resumed her stance, settled in for another few hours of standing very still and thinking about absolutely nothing important. That lasted approximately 4 minutes. The first sign of trouble was the chittering sound echoing down the corridor, high-pitched and curious in a way that made her ears perk up despite herself. The second sign was the Velcari handler, who came sprinting around the corner, all pretense of dignified predator grace abandoned in favor of pure panic. "The Younglings," he gasped, which was when 3 Velcari cubs came tumbling into view, moving with the kind of chaotic energy that suggested they had recently discovered the concept of doors and decided locks were merely suggestions. She had seen Velcari cubs in educational materials. They looked adorable in the same way that baby sharks looked adorable, which was to say they looked like they would grow up to eat you but hadn't quite figured out how yet. These 3 were probably equivalent to human toddlers, all oversized paws and ears they hadn't grown into. They bounded down the corridor with the single-minded determination of children who had found something infinitely more interesting than whatever boring adult thing they were supposed to be doing. Behind them, the corridor erupted into chaos. Several delegates from the Finari contingent took one look at the approaching cubs and made executive decisions about the value of dignity versus survival. A Thernathi representative attempted to climb the wall, which would have been more effective if Thernathi had evolved any climbing ability whatsoever. The Zexian trade minister simply fainted, which seemed excessive but probably saved time. The handler was yelling something in Velcari, which translated through her earpiece as a stream of what were probably very inappropriate words for someone addressing younglings. The cubs ignored him completely, as younglings of every species were apparently programmed to do. She ran through her options with the kind of speed that came from years of training. Option 1, move aside and let the cubs pass. Professional, safe, exactly what protocol suggested. Option 2, attempt to corral the cubs, which would require touching them, which would definitely be interpreted as aggression by their parents, which would result in her becoming a diplomatic incident. Option 3, stand very still and hope the problem resolved itself. The universe, demonstrating its well-documented sense of humor, did not give her time to choose. The first cub spotted her and made a sound that her translator couldn't process, but her brain interpreted as the universal youngling expression of new friend discovered. The cub altered course directly toward her, followed immediately by its siblings, because apparently baby predators traveled in packs even when investigating shiny armor-plated humans. She had perhaps 2 seconds to appreciate the full absurdity of the situation before the cubs reached her position. 2 seconds to note that every other being in the corridor had either fled or was in the process of fleeing. 2 seconds to realize that whatever happened next was going to be documented, analyzed, and probably used as a case study in diplomatic academies for the next century. The cubs hit her position like a small, furry avalanche. And then, because the universe was apparently taking suggestions from comedy writers, they stopped, sniffed her armor plates with great interest, and promptly curled up against her legs as if they had found the galaxy's most comfortable napping spot. The silence that followed was the kind of silence usually reserved for moments right before something explodes, or right after someone says something catastrophically stupid at a dinner party. Every being still, conscious in the corridor, had frozen. Their various respiratory systems paused mid-breath, waiting to see if the human would do something sensible like scream or something foolish like move. She did neither. Training covered a lot of scenarios. Terrorist attacks, medical emergencies, toxic atmosphere breaches, even the occasional drunk ambassador who needed gentle redirection back to their quarters. training had not covered what to do when apex predator infants decided your armored shins made excellent pillows. She suspected this was an oversight in the curriculum that would be corrected shortly, probably with her incident report as the primary source material. The cubs had arranged themselves with the kind of efficient space utilization that suggested this was not their first group napping session. One had wedged itself between her boots, head resting on her left foot. The second had claimed the space against her right leg, tiny claws kneading her armor with the rhythmic contentment of something that had found paradise. The third, apparently the overachiever of the group, had somehow managed to climb partially up her leg and was now draped across her knee joint like a very furry, very dangerous scarf. They were purring. She could feel the vibration through her armor, a subsonic rumble that probably measured on seismic equipment. Velcari purring was not like Earth cat purring, which was adorable and harmless. Velcari purring was the sound their species made when completely relaxed and content, which happened approximately never in the presence of other species. The fact that these cubs were purring while touching a human was going to require xenobiologists to rewrite several textbooks. The handler had stopped running. He now stood approximately 10 meters away, staring at the scene with an expression that transcended species barriers. It was the universal look of an adult who had lost track of children and found them doing something so inexplicable that the brain required several seconds to process the input. "Don't move," he said, which was possibly the most unnecessary instruction she had ever received in her professional career. "Wasn't planning on it," she replied, keeping her voice level and quiet. Sudden loud noises around sleeping predator cubs seemed like a spectacularly bad idea. The corridor was now completely empty except for her, the handler, and the three cubs who had apparently decided she was their new favorite thing in the galaxy. The Zexian trade minister was still unconscious against the far wall, which was probably for the best. Consciousness would only complicate his day further. "This has never happened before," the handler continued, still staring. His translator rendered his tone as somewhere between awe and existential crisis. "Glad to be making history," she said, because humor seemed like the only appropriate response to a situation this absurd. The cubs shifted slightly, adjusting their positions for maximum comfort. The one on her knee squeaked in its sleep, a sound that was devastatingly cute and fundamentally at odds with what this species would become in adulthood. She kept her breathing steady, her posture exactly as it had been before becoming a juvenile Velcari sleeping arrangement. Station security chose that moment to arrive, because of course they did. 3 officers from different species rounded the corner at what probably qualified as high speed for beings who spent most of their time filling out forms. They stopped so abruptly that the rear officer collided with the middle one, creating a small pileup of confused security personnel. The lead officer, a Metharian with excellent eyesight and apparently terrible luck, assessed the situation with the kind of expression that suggested his training had also not covered this particular scenario. His vocal sac inflated and deflated several times before he managed to produce actual words. "What exactly is happening here?" She considered the question. What was happening defied easy explanation. 3 members of one of the most dangerous species in known space had chosen to nap on a human security officer instead of literally anywhere else in a station that offered thousands of more logical sleeping locations. The cub's handler looked like he was reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. Several diplomatic delegations had evacuated an entire corridor because toddlers existed. "Guard duty," she said finally, because it was technically accurate. The cubs continued purring, oblivious to the growing crisis their nap was creating. She could see more personnel gathering at both ends of the corridor, maintaining what they probably considered a safe distance. Someone had deployed portable barriers, as if 3 sleeping cubs represented a containment situation. Someone else was taking readings with equipment that blinked in ways that suggested it was very concerned about something. "We need to establish a perimeter," the Metharian officer said, which they had already done, so this was clearly a stress response rather than a tactical assessment. "We need to contact the Velcari delegation," another officer added. which was when the handler finally found his voice again. "I am the Velcari delegation's child care specialist," he said with as much dignity as someone could muster while watching their charges sleep on an alien. "The parents are in the conference. We cannot interrupt." The officers exchanged glances that communicated an entire conversation about protocols, proper procedure, and the absolute certainty that their jobs had just become exponentially more complicated. Interrupting a diplomatic conference was a serious breach of protocol. Allowing the children of conference attendees to remain unsupervised was also a serious breach of protocol. The fact that the children were technically supervised, just by the wrong species, in the wrong location, and in a configuration that broke several xenobiological assumptions, created a protocol singularity that no manual had prepared them for. "How long do they typically sleep?" she asked, because this seemed like relevant tactical information. The handler's expression suggested she had asked something either very stupid or very frightening. Velcari young at this age require approximately 3 hours of rest following exertion. They were playing in the delegation's quarters before they escaped. 3 hours. She had 3 hours of standing completely still while serving as bedding for apex predator children. Her legs were going to hate her. Her back was already composing formal complaints. Her bladder, wisely, had decided to pretend this wasn't happening. "Can we move them?" one of the officers asked, with the kind of hope that suggested he already knew the answer. "Absolutely not," the handler said firmly. "Disturbing Velcari young during their rest cycle causes distress. Distressed Velcari young summon their parents. Parents respond to distressed offspring with extreme prejudice against whatever caused the distress." The officers nodded in unison, having apparently decided that not disturbing the cubs was the better option compared to explaining to angry Velcari parents why their children were upset. This was sound reasoning. Velcari protective instincts were legendary, which was a polite way of saying they would disassemble anyone who threatened their offspring and then spend several hours making sure the disassembly was thorough. "So we wait," the Matharian officer concluded. "We wait," she confirmed, settling into the mental space soldiers learn to occupy during boring assignments. She had stood guard in worse conditions. Sandstorms on colony worlds with atmospheres that tried to kill you. Space station corridors with artificial gravity set to uncomfortable levels. That one time on the mining outpost where the local fauna had decided her armor was either a rival or a potential mate and had spent 6 hours attempting to fight or court it. This was just 3 sleeping cubs who happened to be from a species most of the galaxy feared. They were warm, soft, and purring contentedly against her armor. Their claws, while sharp enough to shred most materials, were currently retracted. Their teeth, which would eventually grow into formidable weapons, were hidden behind peaceful sleeping expressions. The station's communication system crackled to life overhead, announcing that Conference Hall 7's proceedings were running smoothly and that all attendees were requested to remain in their scheduled sessions. Someone in station administration was clearly having a very different experience of this afternoon than everyone in the corridor. "Should we inform the conference?" an officer asked quietly. The handler considered this with the care of someone weighing multiple bad options against each other. The delegation leader specifically instructed that the Younglings' caretaking not interrupt. Official business, she was very clear about this. Translation: the cub's mother was in that conference and had made it abundantly clear that her children's shenanigans were not to become her problem unless absolutely necessary. This was apparently a universal parenting strategy, transcending species and evolutionary background. More personnel arrived, including what appeared to be the station's head of security, a grizzled Torvanian who had probably seen everything the galaxy had to offer and was now learning he had been wrong about that assumption. He surveyed the scene, both sets of eyes blinking in what might have been disbelief. "Explain," he said simply. She let the handler take that one. Her job was standing still and being furniture. His job was explaining why furniture had become necessary. Word spread through Station Meridian with the speed of really good gossip, which was to say faster than light communications and considerably more dramatic. Within 20 minutes, news drones had arrived, hovering at the maximum safe distance their operators deemed acceptable. Within 30 minutes, the feed had gone live across 6 different networks. Within 40 minutes, the entire Confederation was watching a human stand very still, while Velcari cubs napped on her. The commentary was predictably chaotic. Xenobiologists were having heated debates about predator recognition instincts. Security experts were analyzing tactical implications. One entertainment network had added a viewer poll asking whether this was adorable or terrifying, and the results were split exactly down the middle, which probably said something profound about galactic society, but mostly just said that everyone was confused. She had become the most watched security guard in Confederation history, which was not an achievement she had ever aspired to. Her commanding officer had sent 3 messages, each one progressively more bewildered than the last. The final message had simply read, "Continue mission," in capital letters, which was the military's way of saying they had no idea what else to tell her. The cubs remained blissfully unaware of their newfound fame. They had shifted positions twice, each time managing to find new and creative ways to use her armor as support structures. One had apparently decided her equipment belt made an excellent headrest. Another had stretched out along her calf with the boneless contentment of young things everywhere. The third periodically made small chirping sounds that the handler translated as contentment vocalizations, which was adorable and not helping anyone's stress levels. Station administration had quietly canceled all traffic through this corridor for the foreseeable future. Alternative routes had been established. Several delegations had filed formal complaints about the inconvenience, which station management had apparently responded to with the diplomatic equivalent of "deal with it." The handler had spent the past hour attempting to contact the cubs' parents through increasingly desperate channels, only to discover that the conference had entered a critical negotiation phase where interruptions were absolutely forbidden. The irony that interstellar trade routes were being debated while the Velcari delegation's children slept on human security personnel was not lost on anyone except possibly the people in the conference itself. The conference ended precisely 2 hours and 47 minutes into the napping session, which meant she had 13 minutes left before the cubs would naturally wake. Fate, having already demonstrated its commitment to making this situation as complicated as possible, decided those 13 minutes were negotiable. The Velcari delegation emerged from Conference Hall 7 looking pleased with themselves, which suggested the trade negotiations had gone well. Their expressions shifted rapidly as they took in the scene outside. Security barriers, news drones, their child care specialist, looking like he had aged several years, and one human standing unnaturally still with 3 cubs arranged around her like extremely dangerous accessories. The cub's mother moved with the controlled precision of someone whose protective instincts were about to make tactical decisions her diplomatic training would regret. She crossed the distance in 4 strides, every being in the corridor simultaneously remembering they had urgent business elsewhere. Then she stopped, stared at her sleeping offspring, and made a sound that the translator struggled with before settling on confused parental bewilderment. "They are unharmed," the handler said quickly, words tumbling over each other. "They escaped during playtime. They found the human. They chose to rest. We did not move them." Protocol suggested waiting. The mother's gaze shifted to her, examining her with an intensity that made being scanned by military targeting systems seem friendly by comparison. She kept her posture neutral, her breathing steady, and tried very hard not to think about how many ways this could still go catastrophically wrong. "You did not flee," the mother said finally, and it was not a question. "No, ma'am. Guard duty." Something that might have been amusement flickered across the Velcari's features. She knelt down, carefully scooping up each cub with the practiced efficiency of parents everywhere. The cubs made sleepy protest sounds but settled against their mother's fur, still mostly asleep. "They like you," the mother observed, as if this explained something fundamental about the universe that everyone had previously misunderstood. "They seem nice," she replied. "Because what else did you say when an apex predator told you their children approved of you?" The mother's expression definitely shifted to amusement now. Nice? Yes, very nice cubs who are about to learn what boundaries mean. She turned to the assembled security forces, still holding her drowsy offspring. This human demonstrated exceptional judgment and composure. We are grateful, also bewildered. Mostly grateful. With that, the Velcari delegation departed, cubs and all, leaving behind a corridor full of people trying to process what had just happened. The news drones continued recording. The security barriers remained in place. Someone would eventually have to file incident reports that would baffle bureaucrats for generations. She rolled her shoulders, feeling her muscles remind her that standing motionless for nearly 3 hours while serving as juvenile furniture was not recommended by any fitness manual. Her replacement arrived for the next shift, took one look at her expression, and wisely asked no questions. 2 weeks later, she received a formal commendation from the Confederation for promoting interspecies understanding. 3 weeks after that, the Velcari formally proposed humans for security positions at future high-level negotiations. 4 weeks after that, xenobiologists were still arguing about what the incident meant for predator classification systems. She returned to regular guard duty, where nothing tried to nap on her armor. Mostly, the Confederation of Aligned Systems had spent 3 millennia building a hierarchy based on fear, carefully categorizing species by fang length, claw sharpness, and evolutionary murder efficiency. They had created elaborate protocols for who stood where, who spoke when, and who got to sit at the big table during negotiations. They had convinced themselves this system was logical, necessary, and based on sound xenobiological principles. 3 cubs, sleeping on a human's armor plates, had dismantled centuries of assumptions in under 3 hours. Turned out that apex predator recognition wasn't about teeth or claws, or where your eyes sat on your skull. It was about whether you ran when tested or whether you stood your ground with the calm certainty that everything would probably be fine. The Velcari cubs had understood something the galaxy's greatest minds had missed. Humans didn't react like prey because they had long since stopped thinking like prey. Guard duty, as it turned out, was less about standing in place and more about standing your ground. The galaxy was still figuring out the difference, but they were learning. Some lessons just required a nap first.